they are, why are emergency rooms still closing across the province, Mr. Speaker? 2 years ago, Mr. Speaker, there was a group of dedicated doctors in this province who put together a locum program where they served in various ER departments to help as many of those emergency rooms stay open as possible. When that group of dedicated doctors approached the government with their proposal and to use it on a regular basis to help fill the doctor shortage, they were largely ignored. The government expressed no interest whatsoever or inclination to help the doctors administer or to fund such a program. So my question to the minister, Mr. Speaker, if this government isn't willing to support such a locum program that's proven to work, what does the minister suggest that we do to eliminate the problem, the continuing problem of so many ER closures in this province?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, it is very difficult sometimes to do the things that are brought forward to us. And Mr. Speaker, there is only certain fiscal capacity within the department, within the province. Mr. Speaker, out of the $2.8 billion budget that the Department of Health has, 3/4 of that budget goes to paying for our professionals. Mr. Speaker, when projects come forward, there are a lot of ones that we would love to fund. But, Mr. Speaker, we just do not have the fiscal capacity to do it. So in the auspices of that, we will continue to work with those professionals to get permanent use and permanent physicians to go to places like Glace Bay, Digby, and Lillian Fraser.
The Honourable Member for Glace Bay on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, so far this year, ERs across the province have been closed over 1,300 hours. We're on pace to have our emergency rooms closed a total of 5,600 hours across the province for this year. Mr. Speaker, those numbers are unheard of, and those numbers are totally unacceptable. So my final question to the minister is, will the minister commit to taking action immediately to reduce the number of ER closures in this province before it's too late?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the member opposite for bringing this issue again forward. Mr. Speaker, we are doing as much as we can to find physicians to work in that emergency room. Mr. Speaker, it is an issue of patient safety as well, that we do not want to have an emergency room open that does not have the correct types of professionals in it. Mr. Speaker, maybe some of these places we might have to look at maybe role changes and role look to see what kind of services that they can offer. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to table a piece of information. This one comes from the Truro Daily News of March 19th, and it is, quote, Doctors Nova Scotia says there are too many emergency rooms. And this is from the member. This is from the member from Halifax Clayton Park. She says that perhaps it should be beneficial to have more specialized professionals, even if people have to drive further to access them.
The Honourable Member for Pictou East. Order, please. Order, please. The opposition want to chew up the clock, that's fine, but the Honourable Member for Pictou East has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Environment. The people of Hillside near Trenton have long lived in the shadow of the Trenton Generating Station with fly ash and other particulates spewing from the stacks, covering their homes and vehicles with fine black dust. The fly ash eats away at the paint on their cars and homes, not to mention the impact it's having on the health of people living in the area. Mr. Speaker, do I in fact have the floor?
Is your mic on?
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. The minister visited the area with members of the Hillside Trenton Environmental Watch Association and was asked if the province would change the current standards, making them more stringent. The minister promised to review the standards with his staff to ensure that the province is doing all it can. My question to the minister is what has he found in his examinations? And will changes be forthcoming to make them more stringent?
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you very much for the question. I did review the standards with my staff, with our air quality experts. They have a very good air quality monitoring program there that monitors emissions not only from the Trenton plant but from all over, and I will be offering to the concerned citizens, if they want to meet with them, to hear more about our monitoring program. I was very pleased, Mr. Speaker, that after my visit, and in part because of the good work of the department, that Nova Scotia Power decided to put a bag house on there at a cost of multi-million dollars to deal with the emissions. The UARB, as you may be aware, Mr. Speaker, wanted them to hold off on that decision until the URB made a decision on whether the plant should be closed and phased out in time, and a bag house wouldn't be necessary. But I guess the important point is that one way or another, the problem is being taken care of.
The Honourable Member for Pictou East on your first supplementary.
Here again, through you to the Minister of Environment. The Hillside Trenton Environmental Watch Association is also seeking to have the department carry out independent monitoring of the emissions that are coming out of the Trenton Generating Station. Today, NSPI is self-monitoring and gives out its own reports. When will the minister listen to the people of Hillside and carry out independent monitoring of the emissions at Trenton?
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Mr. Speaker, our air monitoring system is one that we're very proud of in this province. Recently, I had the privilege of going to Cabinet and increasing the funding by hundreds of thousands for the air quality monitoring system that we have. I would invite the member opposite, as I invited the environmental critic, to come, and we toured the air monitoring system over in Dartmouth and had an explanation of it, and I will offer to the citizens who are concerned about the air monitoring to meet with them to get a full picture of the air monitoring we do there, so that they can be assured, as I am assured, that the air monitoring system we have in place is second to none in the country.
The Honourable Member for Pictou East on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I'm going to turn to the Minister of Health. Mr. Speaker, my final question is to the Minister of Health. On May the 24th, 2006, this minister replied to the Hillside Trenton Environmental Watch Association concerns over high rates of cardiac and respiratory disease in the community. This minister replied that the medical officer of health for the area, in conjunction with the Department of Environment and Labour, will look into this matter more fully. My question, Mr. Speaker, as I table this letter to Mr. Peter Boyles that is almost 1 year old, what are the results of your department's investigation into this matter?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And as I have had the opportunity to converse with Mr. Boyles and the group on through the letter, and of course on another occasion of a meeting set up between me by the member of Pictou Centre, that I said this is under the purview of Environment and Labour, and I would refer that question to the Minister of Environment and Labour.
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Mr. Speaker, I am confused and somewhat frustrated. I'm confused and frustrated with the position of the opposition on this matter. Several days after I visited and talked with the environmental group there, Nova Scotia Power said they'd spend $20 million on putting a bag house to take care of the particulates. What more do they want?
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Education. Mr. Speaker, bullying in our schools is a subject of concern to parents, teachers, and students. Last year's suspension figures included over 700 suspensions for bullying. The previous year, only 520 distinct suspensions were recorded. That's a 30% increase in just 1 year. Sadly, we know that these figures do not give us the full story. That's because the department doesn't formally track suspension stats in our schools. So my first question to the minister is, when is she going to be able to tell us the full extent of bullying in our schools?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the member opposite for the question. We recognize that this is an issue in our schools, and we have taken very active steps to try to identify and respond to that. Each individual board has its own discipline policy, and they track their own records of numbers of suspension and reason for suspension and length of suspension. So we have asked the boards for that information, and when that information is available, it will be compiled, but it is certainly available at the board level.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Brandon Walker, a Dartmouth High School student, and Robert Fournette of Bathurst, New Brunswick, have collaborated to launch an anti-bullying website, www.bullyingkidsspeakup.ca. Both of these young men have been victims of bullying, and they are now working together to share their stories with other victims in the hope that it will raise awareness around the issue of bullying. Victims of bullying can post their stories to the site anonymously, which will allow them to vent and learn from the experience of others. Using this modern technology, Brandon and Robert have indeed done their part to face bullying head-on. So my question to the minister is, what is your department doing to face bullying head-on?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to, first of all, congratulate Brandon and Robert for turning that around and making something that was obviously not pleasant for them into a learning experience for others. We have, as this House would know, invested money in a security officer who will work with all boards and is currently working with all boards to look at best practices, and so those best practices can be shared and all boards and all schools can benefit from that. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, recorded suspensions for bullying in Chignecto Central Regional School Board went against provincial trends and indeed reduced by almost a quarter in 2005-06. As the minister is no doubt aware, there is an extensive anti-bullying awareness program being conducted there in association with the RCMP. Of course, we don't know for sure whether the two issues are linked, but we can guess that they probably most certainly are. So my final question to the minister is, what has the Department of Education done to ensure that a provincial anti-bullying strategy is established and is properly funded?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and to the member opposite and to all House, I want to repeat that one of the things that we need to do at the department is to identify from the boards and have them identify for us all of those best practices. Chignecto Central's anti-bullying policy and procedure will certainly be one that will be a best practice, along with others from other boards, and so we can all take advantage of those.
The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party.
Mr. Speaker, once again today Nova Scotians are suffering from high gas prices at the pumps due to gas regulation, and once again the Liberal caucus stands alone in fighting for lower prices at the pumps for Nova Scotians. Mr. Speaker, for several weeks now the people of this province have been paying roughly 10% more for gas at the pumps than our neighbours to the north in New Brunswick. The maximum price for regular self-serve in Nova Scotia is $1.14.5 per litre, and in New Brunswick the price is over 11 cents lower at $1.03.2 per litre. The tax differences between our two provinces do not account for an 11-cent difference, so there is only one conclusion which can be reached. The Nova Scotia PC government is forcing our citizens to pay more for gas at the pumps. Therefore, my question to the Premier is, why do you continue to support a regulated system that makes the residents of Nova Scotia pay 10 cents per litre more than the residents of New Brunswick?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I'll refer that to the Minister responsible to provide an update on the situation.
The Honourable Minister of Service Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Thank you, Speaker. As the honourable member knows, that regulation was was introduced into our province because the people in Nova Scotia wanted, indeed about 70%. And it was introduced to see that prices were stabilized across the province and that we would not have sharp rises and flings every second day, and also at the request of the Retail Gasoline Dealers Association.
The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotians having to pay 11 cents a litre more than the people in New Brunswick is not what anyone would call price stability here in the province of Nova Scotia. Gouging appears to be more appropriate as to what is going on. Mr. Speaker, New Brunswick is also a regulated market, and the tax difference should only account for half of what the difference is today between our provinces. We are now hearing reports from retailers of significant sales increases on the New Brunswick side of the border, while on the Nova Scotia side, our retailers are facing significant declines due to the difference in price. Mr. Premier, you told the people of this province that gas regulation would help consumers and would help retailers. Well, we now know that it has done neither and has placed our province at a competitive disadvantage. So again, my question to the Premier, who implemented gas regulation and forced it upon the people of our province, while your government has used the interrupter clause to increase prices on several occasions, why will you not use it now to lower prices for Nova Scotia drivers?
The Honourable the Premier.
Speaker, I'll refer that to the Minister.
The Honourable Minister of Service Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Mr. Speaker, we probably have the most carefully thought out and best designed formula for determining gas prices in the country. The prices that are determined in Nova Scotia are really mathematically based, and indeed, I know that the Leader of the Liberal Party can't work it out, but you know, there are others who can, Mr. Speaker, and to be quite frank, if the swing is enough for this government to bring in the interrupter clause, we have done it, and we will certainly do it again, either to lower prices or hopefully never, but to raise prices as well.
The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party on your final supplementary.
Well, you know, Mr. Speaker, maybe the Minister can tell us as to what Wilson's Fuels' opinion is on gas regulation from the last time he spoke to them and the wonderful remarks he had to make about them here in the House of Assembly. Mr. Speaker, gas regulation was a bad idea when the Leader of the NDP proposed it, and it was a bad idea when the Progressive Conservative government implemented it. No. For some reason, he hasn't taken much credit for gas regulation when it's 11 cents a litre more in Nova Scotia than it is in New Brunswick. He's been kind of quiet on that issue, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, while our current Premier is fond of thanking our former Premier for his work on the Atlantic Accord, he should also thank him for rejecting gas regulation here in Nova Scotia when it was put forward to him by the NDP party. Mr. Speaker, the only true beneficiary of gas regulation and its higher prices has been the PC government coffers. Therefore, my final supplementary, which hopefully the Premier this time will take the opportunity to answer, will be, why do you continue to support gas regulation that forces Nova Scotia drivers to pay more than they should at the pumps?
The Honourable the Premier.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and the Minister has been very clear. The study is coming forward soon. We have been implementing gas regulation in the last number of months in Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker, and the facts speak for themselves. But, Mr. Speaker, we are certainly interested to see what the study comes back with, as I'm sure the opposition is, Mr. Speaker, and I will not pretend to be an expert, but I will listen to the experts when I certainly see the report come back.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth South, Portland Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Community Services. Women's centres in the province of Nova Scotia continue to struggle with inadequate funding, making their work more and more challenging. These centres provide invaluable support and programs for women, especially those living in poverty. As the income gap continues to grow between affluent and poor in Canada, the services are becoming more and more in demand. My question to the Minister of Community Services, Women's centres have been given empty promises of increased funding for several years. When will they receive adequate funding to help women living in poverty and isolation?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my honourable colleague for the opportunity to rise and speak on an issue that is extremely important to my honourable colleague as well as all members of this House. Mr. Speaker, I've had the opportunity to make my way around the province and visit with many of the women's centres from one end of this province to the other. They indeed do a phenomenal service for women and children in need, Mr. Speaker, and it's for that reason that this government has supported in the past, Mr. Speaker, and will continue to support in the future, Mr. Speaker, the fine work done by the individuals in those centres, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth South Portland Valley on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No one is denying the good work that's being done in the women's centres, but their workload is increasing, their staff are inadequately paid, and they've been giving this message to the Minister and the Department for many, many years. The staff at the 8 women's centres in Nova Scotia are highly skilled, dedicated and competent individuals. However, they have not had regular salary increases for many years, and they are falling further and further behind in the cost of living index. The Minister has heard from women's centres about these concerns, yet the situation of low pay and insufficient staffing continues. My question to the Minister: when will the underfunding of women's centres finally be addressed?
The Honourable Member, Minister of Community Services.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the honourable member is absolutely correct when she states that the work that they do is excellent work, Mr. Speaker. It's for that very reason, Mr. Speaker, that this government, the government last year and the government again this year, will continue to provide funding to the women's centres across this province. Not only will we continue to provide the core funding initially, Mr. Speaker, which went to those centres, but indeed last year in the budget there was an increase of $55,000 to each of the women's centres, Mr. Speaker, as a formula for core funding, and we will continue with that, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth South Portland Valley on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Women's centres are asking, and it's been proven in study after study, they're asking for a staff salary increase and for one additional crisis support counsellor program outreach position for each centre. The need for this has been proven time and time again. This is so that they can continue to provide a voice and source of help to over 15,000 women a year in Nova Scotia. So my question to the Minister: how much longer will this inadequate funding continue for a critical service to the women in our province?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, anytime someone asks me about resources and financing, Mr. Speaker, I'm always very proud to be able to say that this government is a fiscally responsible government, Mr. Speaker, while being socially progressive as well, Mr. Speaker. It's for that very reason that this government committed $155,000 of core funding, Mr. Speaker, to each of the women's centres to indeed continue with the fine work that they do, Mr. Speaker, and we'll work to continue that in the future.
The Honourable Member for Sackville-Cobequid.
My question this afternoon is for the Minister of Health, Mr. Speaker. Last month, Nova Scotians were shocked to hear about the case of abuse that took place at Glenhaven Manor. 2 staff taped the resident's mouth shut and drew a happy face on the tape. The staff have been disciplined and their action is being reviewed by the professional body. But there are broader questions that still haven't been addressed, Mr. Speaker. So my question to the Minister of Health: why hasn't the Protection of Person in Care Act, now over 2 years old, not been proclaimed?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, and I have expressed my outrage to this act that happened at Glenhaven Manor. Mr. Speaker, I can also say that there were a number of actions that have been done at that facility. A number of them include further training for all staff, to ensure that people understand the issue of elder abuse, that understand what constitutes it, and how to report it. Mr. Speaker, I know that that had been referred, or this issue had been referred to the respective colleges of these practitioners, and is being reviewed. I know there was one decision to say that they felt that everything had been done correctly, and that they requested further training for those members.
The honourable member for Sackville-Cobequid on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Health again didn't come anywhere near the question that I asked. In this legislature, Mr. Speaker, we passed a piece of legislation, and we would think that government would respect the process that follows when a bill passes through these chambers, Mr. Speaker. Countless other provinces had no issue enacting similar legislation and is now enforced, offering protection to residents in special care facilities and nursing homes. It obligates staff to report abuse, but it also protects the staff from retaliation for reporting any abuse, Mr. Speaker. In addition to this act, nursing homes need appropriate staffing levels, and staff need better training to handle dementia patients, Mr. Speaker. So I ask the Minister of Health, when will these issues be addressed to recognize a growing number of nursing home residents who, with challenging behaviours, Mr. Speaker?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, throughout this process, there has been a lot of consultations with the respective unions, with the respective colleges, to make sure that the persons with the Protection of Persons in Care Act can go congruently with the workplace and the violence information that I know that the Minister for Environment and Labour is working hard upon. Mr. Speaker, this is a two-sided street as well, where we do not want to see things done towards our patients, but at the same time there is a fair amount of work and violence workplace that needs to be addressed at the same time, and we'll continue to work with the unions as well as the Minister of Environment and Labour on this issue.
The honourable member for Sackville-Cobequid on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's been 2 years now, Mr. Speaker, since this act was passed in this House. I hope it doesn't take another 2 years for this government to act for changes that is needed in this province. Some nursing homes tell us their percentage of patients with dementia is now 75% or more, Mr. Speaker. The Homes for Special Care Act was written, when it was written, Mr. Speaker, had levels half that amount, Mr. Speaker. The best way to stop abuse is to have adequate staffing, proper training, the Protection of Persons in Care Act for those rare cases when abuse occurs, Mr. Speaker. My question to the Minister of Health, when will these measures be addressed to reassure families that their loved ones in care in Nova Scotia are safe?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, I can say that I disagree somewhat with the member opposite. I can say that through awareness and through correct training that these issues can be avoided in the future. And Mr. Speaker, I can assure members opposite that we will do everything that we can to ensure that this does not happen again.
The honourable member for Halifax-Clayton Park.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Premier. In the 1999 Blue Book, John Hamm promised that his government would not engage in politically motivated advertising paid for by taxpayers. Now in 2007, under your watch, Mr. Speaker, under the watch of this Premier, we see the introduction of a so-called government newsletter. I'd like to table a copy of that for the record. In announcing the newsletter, the Premier blamed the media for his image problems, saying that they were not representing the government in a positive light. My question, Mr. Speaker, for the Premier is, why are you so clearly engaging in politically motivated advertising at the expense of Nova Scotia taxpayers?
The Honourable the Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, thank you to the member for the question. Mr. Speaker, and in fact, the government has a responsibility to the taxpayers of our province to ensure that we provide them with an update regularly with what government is doing with their money, Mr. Speaker, with respect to policies, Mr. Speaker, with respect to initiatives. In fact, the member from Kings West today said the government needs to do a better job on ATVs and communicating with people. That's one of the reasons why we're doing the newsletter, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member for Halifax-Clayton Park on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, The finance minister announced just before Christmas that the province had misjudged the amount of money left for the year in the surplus, and we were down to a razor-thin $3.3 million surplus. Departments were instructed to cut back spending, defer spending, and conserve as much as possible. Following that announcement, the Premier announced that he will engage in a $232,000 printing of these glossy brochures at taxpayers' expense. My question, Mr. Speaker, to the Premier is, when you decided to do the newsletter, were you aware of the severe financial pressures that the province is under, and do you call this essential spending?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I think that we have a responsibility to indicate to Nova Scotians what we are doing with their money, Mr. Speaker. Now, perhaps the member who has, I know she has aspirations, Mr. Speaker, perhaps she has a different view on that. But, Mr. Speaker, I can tell you, this government, and as long as I am Premier, will let Nova Scotians know how we are spending their money.
The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I don't know how the Premier can justify spending $250,000 to try and raise his polling numbers when $232,000 could provide for 928 low-income people to get the Keep the Heat program rebate, or for 580 seniors to have their pharmacare premiums paid. Mr. Speaker, the people of this province can see right through this politically motivated move. My question to the Premier is, will you commit to us today to withdraw your plan to continue with the quarterly newsletter and put that money towards essential programs and services for Nova Scotians?
The Honourable the Premier.
No, I'm going to take the advice of the member for Kings West and communicate with Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable member for Halifax Citadel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Immigration. Mr. Speaker, the Office of Immigration recently stated that Nova Scotia attracted 2,580 immigrants in 2006. That's an increase of 1/3 on 2005. If the numbers keep rising to the same extent, we will meet provincial targets for immigration early. Despite this progress, as the latest census figures show, we are just barely keeping our head above water. We know that a majority of these immigrants will leave Nova Scotia. My first question to the Minister is, what is the Office of Immigration doing to ensure that these people settle in Nova Scotia permanently?
The Honourable Minister of Immigration.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And part of the immigration strategy is to make sure that we are a welcoming community here when our newcomers do arrive. By doing such, we have allocated in last year's budget $1.8 million, which was a significant increase of over $500,000 alone.
The Honourable member for Halifax Citadel on your first supplementary.
Perhaps we're not as welcoming as we should be, Mr. Speaker, when 60% of them leave. Mr. Speaker, I would like to table a news release from the province of Manitoba, whose population is just a little larger than that of Nova Scotia. Last year, Manitoba received almost 10,000 immigrants, up almost 25% on the year before. Manitoba had almost as many immigrants from the Philippines as Nova Scotia had in total. When we examine the figures in detail, we see that Manitoba received 6,600 provincial nominee immigrants. Here in Nova Scotia, we issued just 300 nominee certificates. So my second question to the Minister is, how many additional provincial nominees is the federal government allowing for Nova Scotia this year?
The Honourable Minister of Immigration.
Mr. Speaker, on the current nominee program that we have in place, we're allowed 400. That nominee program expires this year. It'll be under review, and our aim is to have the numeric number removed from that altogether.
The Honourable member for Halifax Citadel on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Recent Office of Immigrant figures show that 80% of the immigrants to Nova Scotia settle in the metro area. This trend is similar to experiences in most other Canadian provinces. However, some rural areas in Manitoba and British Columbia are very successful at attracting and retaining immigrants. So my final question to the Minister is, when is she going to address the problem of rural outmigration and skilled worker shortages by increasing the number of provincial nominees allowed by each RDA in Nova Scotia.
The Honourable Minister of Immigration.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And under the current nominee program, again, we're only allowed 500. That contract expires this year. It will be under a review. At that point in time, we hope that we will be successful in having those numeric limits removed. I have been traveling across the province the last few months, talking to communities, encouraging, trying to find out why our immigrant population do not go to rural Nova Scotia. One of the key reasons people do not go to those reasons is that they are not employable at that point in time. They go to where the jobs are. Our job is to make sure that rural Nova Scotia, there are more jobs there, and we are working with economic development to see that that happens.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Community Services. Recently, a concerned mother of a 15-year-old girl phoned my office because her daughter was in need of help and the mother couldn't find it. Her daughter was, as her mother put it, completely out of control and on the road to complete self-destruction, including threats of suicide, running away from home multiple times, and being suspended from school indefinitely. Mr. Speaker, a few months ago, the McAvoy Inquiry's report made several recommendations that would enable help and assistance to this family and many others. My question for the Minister is, when will your government follow through on these important recommendations?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and indeed I thank my honourable colleague for the opportunity to rise today and speak to an issue which is extremely important and one that this government takes very seriously. Mr. Speaker, when the Nunn Commission came down with their recommendations, I stood proudly with my colleagues from Justice and Education and Health Promotion, and we proudly accepted all of the recommendations of Justice Nunn. And, Mr. Speaker, it is this government's plan and this government's commitment to indeed do everything that we can do in accordance with Justice Nunn's recommendations to ensure the safety and the security of all Nova Scotians, especially those who are in our need.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth North on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, this young lady has been a victim of sexual abuse. She's had many family members pass away, along with young friends. This individual is unable to deal with the emotional stresses caused by these situations. When her mother looked for help, she was told it was a Department of Health issue. Despite this, however, it is Children's Aid who continues to deal with her. My question through you, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister is, when will her department start accepting responsibility for these cases and deal with them directly instead of passing them through other departments and perhaps eventually on to the Justice Department?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And indeed, the hard-working, dedicated staff of the Department of Community Services, as well as the Department of Health, the Department of Justice, take these issues very seriously, Mr. Speaker. And I again stood proudly with my colleagues when we addressed the recommendations of Nunn. And I made the commitment that, as lead minister, the silos would come down, Mr. Speaker. And I repeat that today in the House for all members present. We are working on a strategy to bring together all of the resources that we have here in the province. And, Mr. Speaker, we have a multitude of resources. It's almost unbelievable when you look at the list. And sometimes it is difficult to maneuver your way through which department or which resource it is that you need. And I know the honourable colleague across the way has come to my department and has come to me, and we've worked together to find our way through the myriad of supports. And we'll continue to do that, Mr. Speaker, as we break down the silos, we bring together the resources, and we offer those resources to Nova Scotians in a timely and dedicated manner, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The Honourable Member for Dartmouth North on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the Department of Community Services would not accept this young girl into care because there are no small option beds available. The only way that this woman could get care of her daughter was to have Children's Aid take over her care. My question, Mr. Speaker, through you is, when will the moratorium on small option beds be lifted so that children like this have somewhere to go without entering your custody?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And my honourable colleague brings another issue to the floor, which is near and dear to my heart, Mr. Speaker. And certainly, as we move forward on the various options available for high needs, complex cases, for youth in our care, for Nova Scotians who come to us who are at their wits' end, Mr. Speaker, as we move forward with the plans to put in place a series of options for people to be able to maximize, whether it's small option home, whether it's those complex cases, Mr. Speaker, that we have to deal with on a one-on-one basis. Mr. Speaker, this government takes that very seriously. There's a review underway that has been expedited by myself and by the department, Mr. Speaker. We look forward to those results. But, Mr. Speaker, I'm not waiting for those results to take action. We've already put in place a 5-bed home in Dartmouth, Mr. Speaker. We'll continue to move forward with our plans for Cobequid. And, Mr. Speaker, I look forward to the day when we're able to provide services for all those who need.
Thank you. The honourable member for Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Education. Mr. Speaker, the federal government recently announced it would spend additional millions for universities and colleges in the 2008-9 year. With Nova Scotia having among the highest tuition fees in the country, the additional funding is viewed as a positive beginning to alleviate the burden most students face in this province. Mr. Speaker, providing accessible and affordable education is crucial to Nova Scotia as our country moves further to a knowledge-based economy. However, there have been no assurances that the new funding for post-secondary education will go directly towards tuition relief. My question to the Minister: will the Minister tell Nova Scotians what her department plans on doing with the additional funding?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as this House will remember, when the infrastructure money became available for us last year, we met with students. I met with students personally to see what students were thinking about as the best way to help address their funding issues and their costs for university. Listened to those students, and we were able to give them relief in January, which was welcomed on their second semester tuition. One of the messages that students gave us was that they were looking for needs-based dollars to help those students who were in need. And so we are prepared to work with the student body to try to meet the needs of those students who are financially not able.
The honourable member for Kings West on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This government has not given students in this province the guarantee that the new funding dollars will go directly towards tuition relief. Furthermore, the government has not guaranteed that any of the new funds will go towards alleviating the decaying state of the province's university and college infrastructure needs. My question to the Minister: will the Minister guarantee that the new funding dollars will go directly towards tuition relief?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would refer the member opposite to the commitment that was made by this government to bring tuitions for university students to the national average by 2010-2011, and we will honour that commitment.
Hear, hear. The honourable member for Kings West on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, universities outside of Nova Scotia, such as Memorial, offer the lowest tuition fees in the country. Moreover, the government of Newfoundland and Labrador has made a $25 million a year commitment to keep tuition frozen at $2,550 until at least the 2007-8 academic
Order,
school
please.
year.
There's too much noise in the chamber. The honourable member for Kings West has the floor.
Meanwhile, the average annual increase in tuition fees in Nova Scotia is likely to continue at 3.9% for an average of $6,571. Mr. Speaker, it is no surprise that approximately 850 students from the province this year alone have left to study at Memorial University. Furthermore, the $440 tuition relief for only Nova Scotia students is a federal grant that will run out the end of 2007 and 8. If Nova Scotia is to become more self-reliant, then it must stop depending on the federal government to solve all our problems and invest in our children's education. My final question to the Minister: how does the Minister plan on reducing tuition fees to the national average in Nova Scotia when the new MOU is likely to allow an additional annual 3.9% increase in tuition fees?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, as I said earlier, we are committed to that meeting the national average by 2010, 2011, and any federal dollars that we have at our disposal to help with that reduction will be applied directly to student university tuition.
The honourable member for Queens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Community Services. Privateer Co-op in Queens County has offered affordable housing to families for over 20 years. Unfortunately, the co-op has fallen on some difficult times, and some of the units being built on low ground and recent construction around the area has led to flooding issues. 2 units are particularly affected and are unrentable. If the co-op could only repair these units, their situation would improve drastically. I've met with the co-op board and concerned community members, and they are unhappy with the province's treatment of co-op housing. The province makes it extremely difficult for co-ops to find ways of refinancing, and they really need more flexibility in order to thrive. If just one mortgage payment is missed, the province takes over the co-ops, ending years of democratic governance. Mr. Speaker, with just a little help, the Privateer Co-op and others like it could continue to provide safe, affordable, and sustainable housing to families. But this department seems more interested in putting up roadblocks to true co-op housing than helping it survive. My question to the minister: when will her government finally stop favouring private developers and put some affordable housing money into retaining and creating more cooperative housing in Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Well, Mr. Speaker, thank you very much for the opportunity to rise and speak about something that this government is extremely proud of, Mr. Speaker, and that's a $90 million commitment and investment in affordable housing for the province of Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker. Now, Mr. Speaker, those are some phenomenal numbers, Mr. Speaker. When you look at the population of Nova Scotia, we've invested dollars up to this point all across the province, Mr. Speaker, under Phase 1. We will continue to invest dollars under Phase 2. The RFPs went out for Phase 2, and they've been brought back in by February the 15th of this year, Mr. Speaker. So we will look forward to receiving those proposals, and we will see where those projects will go across the province, Mr. Speaker, as we move forward with additional commitments and additional investments in affordable housing for all Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker, from one end of the province to the other. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Actually, question period does go to 4:47. The honourable member for Queens.
I believe the minister co-op. I was talking about co-op housing in the province, and I would really like the minister to look at what monies from the housing department can be injected into co-op housing across this province. We have many cooperatives across the province, and certainly Privateer Days or Privateer Co-op housing in Queens is looking for some assistance with their housing concerns. So I'm trusting that the minister will look seriously into making available some funding for cooperative housing across this province. Question, I would like to have a timeline as to when the minister will invest funds into cooperative housing.
The Honourable Minister of Community Services for the last word.
Mr. Speaker, I'm extremely pleased to rise, and again, Mr. Speaker,
Order, please.
speak about the commitment of...
Order, please. Time allotted for question period has unfortunately expired. Opposition business. The Honourable Liberal House Leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the first order of business today will be resolution number 1921, but Mr. Speaker, I hope to get unanimous consent of the House to present this resolution because it has not been on the order paper for 2 days. I've spoken to both House leaders and they're in agreement, but I need to get unanimous
Order,
consent
please.
of the House. Okay?
Order, please. The request is for unanimous consent of the House for the proceed with resolution 1921. Is it agreed? Honourable Liberal House Leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I now call resolution number 1921.
The Honourable Member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's with pleasure and dismay that I rise today to speak about this resolution today. The Resource Recovery Fund Board of Nova Scotia was created to ensure that the people of Nova Scotia receive a maximum environmental benefits associated with responsible, solid waste management. Well, the Resource Recovery Fund Board in January of this year all of a sudden decided that burning tires for fuel at a cement plant would be a great idea. Now, that's definitely not anything to do with the sensible approach to getting rid of tires. There's all kinds of possibilities for tires. They could be used in many ways to make products, employ people, and do so many things that are so positive. Today in the regional municipality, if you try to light a fire, a brush fire with a tire, fire department comes along, get a permit, they'll give you a fine. So what's the difference between getting a fine from the fire department for burning a tire that should be totally illegal than a cement plant burning for fuel or any place else burning for fuel? The real question here is today, why should we even consider burning tires anytime for fuel? That's really the question. You can talk all you like, you can say anything you want, and you can put science on either side of it, but probably at the end of the day, somewhere down the road, someone's going to definitively prove that burning tires is a health hazard to the people, an environmental hazard to the world we live in. We have to find alternative uses. And I feel, in this case, the RFB and the Resource Recovery Fund Board has done an excellent job in other areas. Unfortunately, when it seems to come to tires, they've turned a blind eye. And probably very soon, the government will approve the burning of tires at Lafarge, based on some scientific evidence, and it better be concrete when that time comes, if that indeed is the case. I would hope that definitely is not the case, and that we eliminate burning tires in this province for good, set it to rest, and it's the end of the problem that we will have. We've looked at the Trenton plant, the generating plant that burns coal, causes all kinds of problems with the environment, with health of the people in the area. And the more of these things we do, the more at risk we are for health issues. Healthcare in this province, costs are out of control. We see that people now coming forward to need very special drugs to treat programs, and the burning of tires is going to create more of this, more healthcare costs, more healthcare problems, more suffering and pain for people, as well as long-term difficulties for our environment. Again, I believe we have to stop even considering burning tires. Just think of the possibility. Think of it. The minister said it when he rose earlier in my question period, that are they going to pay for tires at Lafarge when they get them? No, they're going to get them free. Probably, the minister can correct me if I'm wrong on this, they're probably going to get paid to pick them up. Not only are they going to get them free, but they're going to get paid to pick them up. That's a pretty good deal for a company when you look at it. I'd like the minister to correct me on that if I'm wrong, but I don't think I'm wrong. And it means that here we are, as people that pay the fees every time you buy a tire, you're supporting an industry to burn a tire to ruin your health. Does that make any sense? Sure doesn't make any sense to me. And that's what appears to be this government is set to do. When I asked the Premier if he would eliminate the tires being burnt, just totally eliminate tires being burnt, they passed the question off and didn't answer the question. The answer must be that they're going to allow it, and if they allow it here, does it mean that Nova Scotia Power next is going to be burning it in place of the bunker seed that they do now, instead of looking at alternative energy sources and sources that will make our province more competitive in the world market and make us a healthier place to live? Nova Scotia is a wonderful place to live. But you look at our employment stats, and there's fewer people working in Nova Scotia now than there was 3 or 4 years ago. And that number is going to continue to go down. Our unemployment rate is down because fewer people are looking for work, and then fewer people are employed. So the stats, however you look at them, that's another thing we could do with these tires. We could take these tires, turn them into a real industry, and let the RFB do what they're supposed to be doing. Get some innovation into developing alternate uses for tires, for glass, for whatever they collect. Let's eliminate the dumps, and let's eliminate these kind of problems, and let's turn them into profit. Let's turn them into profit for the people of the province in jobs and in tax base for the municipalities and the province and the federal government, and ensure that people can live healthier. Let's eliminate these things. But there doesn't seem to be a will by this government to be remotely interested in that. And my colleague from Digby is going to talk about that in more detail, some possible uses for the tires when he speaks. And I'm very interested to see what he's going to have to say. But I'm going to repeat again, We cannot burn tires in this province. It doesn't make sense to burn tires in this province. And if we continue on the path we're on now, we're going to see people get sicker, we're going to have more health care costs and more difficulties. And health care costs doesn't add to our economy. It actually hurts our economy because people aren't working when they should be working. They're not there being productive when they should be productive. And when you've got to go clean these things up down the road, it's a horrendous cost. And some things you can never clean up. They never go away. So I hope when the minister brings forward his long-awaited study from Dalhousie University that it clearly lays out the dangers of burning tires. I've got some information here that was distributed by the Resource Recovery Fund Board, and they talk about all the wonderful things about how tires don't really affect anything and other issues that they bring forward. Again, it just doesn't make sense to burn tires. A few years ago, we wouldn't have been talking about this sort of issue of burning tires. It's before we knew that there was a correlation between chemicals and cancers and other illnesses that we're suffering with every day. Why take a chance? Why take a chance on burning tires to find out down the road that it created some kind of a new cancer, or it creates a cancer that we already have, or some kind of an illness that's going to affect us, our children, our grandchildren, and their children? It doesn't make sense. It just simply doesn't make sense. So I would encourage this government to stop considering burning tires, direct the Resource Recovery Fund Board to eliminate the burning of tires, take it off the table as an option, cancel the contract that they have in place with Lafarge, and put something in place that will ensure that the people of this province get a good deal on the $3 of pudding, but more importantly on their health and the long-term health of this province and our environment. So as I close on this issue, it's important to remember that as we move forward and we learn more, and we're always learning more about the hazardous chemicals and the problems and the climate change and things that people weren't even paying attention to even 5 years ago when the scientists were telling us about it. Today, it's important to us, it's important to all of us to make sure we can live healthy, safe lives in our communities no matter where our community is. And if your community is near a facility that burns this type of garbage, really it's garbage, when you start burning it, it's garbage, how can you ensure that your family is going to be safe? You can't. You simply cannot. So in closing, I'd like to encourage the government to stop the consideration of burning tires and look at alternatives that will put Nova Scotians to work in a safe and healthy environment. Thank you.
Thank you. The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the member opposite for bringing this important matter to the floor of the legislature. I want to assure the members that the Environmental Act and our air quality regulations are strong and are there protecting the citizens of Nova Scotia. As I stated in question period, it's important to understand the process. There is no legal ability for any company to use tires for tire-derived fuel or to burn tires in any way, shape, or fashion in the province of Nova Scotia now. I know the member opposite understands the process, but for the elucidation of others, the industrial approval that was given to the Lafarge plant was to use coal and bunker C fuel mainly for their cement kiln. If they want to use tires for tire-derived fuel, Mr. Speaker, they would have to seek another industrial approval process. That industrial approval process involves public consultation, and the community will have a wonderful opportunity to speak about it if it ever comes to that. But to date, I have received no such application, Mr. Speaker. However, in anticipation of that, as I've mentioned before, and because I know the issue is an issue that's been discussed in Quebec and Ontario and down in California, where incidentally they are allowing the use of it, Mr. Speaker, I asked for a study from Dalhousie. That study, I understand, is finished this morning. I have not yet seen it. If it is not complete and doesn't meet the requirements that I've asked for, particularly in regard to the health implications, I will ask for further updates on that, and the results of that report will be made public to all people to see. I've stated before that any application for the use of tires for tire-derived fuel will have to meet scientific validation. It will have to be supported by the results of sound science. And I was pleased to see very recently that the Lafarge company itself said that they would not proceed with the use of tar for tire-derived fuel unless the scientific evidence proved that it was not harmful to the environment. And that's where the issue now stands. Now, I need to just further state that it's really not up to the Minister of Environment to direct the RFB to do this or to do that. We created the RFB as an arm's-length organization. I am the sole shareholder, but we give it maximum freedom, as I do with the Workmen's Compensation Board, to go about doing their work on behalf of the citizens of Nova Scotia so that there isn't the political interference that perhaps there may have been in the past. And so as an independent board, they have made this proposal, Mr. Speaker. However, as I stated before, it cannot go ahead without an industrial approval from myself, and we haven't received an application for that at this time. The member opposite talked about the pay for tires, and I just need to point out that tires, used tires, are not a benefit. I know of very few people that would consider a used tire as a sort of financial benefit, as some sort of good that they could make money. As opposed, Mr. Speaker, I'll draw the comparison with cardboard, which is something that does sell on the open market and has a use, but tires don't. Aside from perhaps using it to pot plants in or maybe a swing, it's a liability. And so the $3 covers basically the collection, the transportation of it, but when we talk about Lafarge getting some sort of economic benefit that we're giving to them through used tires are really a liability for the province. We had a system before through a different company that was picking up these tires because they are a liability. They're an environmental hazard, they're an eyesore. That company was not, in the end, able to fulfill its contract, so the RRFB went out to another tender to try and find another company that would be able to deal with these used tires so they weren't stockpiling across the province. And that's where we're at right now with this request with this tender given to Lafarge. But again, Lafarge is not burning tires here in the province of Nova Scotia. Lafarge cannot burn tires here in the province of Nova Scotia without an industrial approval, Mr. Speaker. That industrial approval has, I think, about 26 days of where there's consideration, there is a public consultation, and there are scientific studies. So, Mr. Speaker, while I see the concern of the members opposite, because I value their input and I value their concern about making our environment better, there seems to be that they're jumping ahead of the issue right now because there is no approval from my department at this stage and there is no application. As I stated before, the member opposite talked about the health implications, and Mr. Speaker, I take those very, very seriously. And in fact, one of the mandates that I gave to this Dalhousie study was a very broad mandate, but one of the things I wanted in particular to find out was what are the health implications, what's going on in other jurisdictions. Mr. Speaker, it's of interest that California and Quebec, who are known as leaders in environmental stewardship, actually allow the use of tar-derived fuel in the appropriate technology in a kiln that burns at a certain temperature where there are no emissions that are harmful to the residents of those provinces, that state. The study that I commissioned will be looking at California, looking at Quebec, and other jurisdictions to find out what's going on there, because they have had experience in this. In Bath, Ontario, I understand the Ontario government has allowed a pilot project to go forward, so they've not allowed the use of tar-derived fuel as a whole, as Quebec has done, or California, but they said we'll do a pilot project, carefully monitor it, and see what happens. I think, Mr. Speaker, we need to be very clear. The protection of the environment will be there. I can assure the members of this House that it will be there. The industrial approval process will make sure it's there. The scientific study will make sure it's there. However, we also need to be open, Mr. Speaker, to the possibilities that technology can advance and that things that couldn't be done in the past in an environmentally sound way might be able to be done in the future. And so to categorically rule out any use of tire-derived fuel without looking at the scientific evidence, I think, Mr. Speaker, is to be somewhat of a Luddite in terms of technological advancement. We need to be able to match our use of technology with our ability to care for the environment. And in fact, Mr. Speaker, when we talk about climate change, that's one of the very things that we're involved in, as my honourable colleague, Minister of Energy, would say, that new technologies are coming forward, coal sequestration, clean coal, things that will allow certain things to happen that in the past couldn't happen. And with tire-derived fuels, certainly the jurisdictions of Quebec and California, and to a much more limited degree the province of Ontario, have decided that there are technological kilns that burn at certain levels, ways of using the tires for tire-derived fuel that don't harm the environment. Now, Mr. Speaker, I want to be very clear that the fact that Quebec and California do it does not mean that if I receive an application that the industrial approval will be given in Nova Scotia. This will be a Nova Scotia study. That's why I went to Dalhousie University, not out of the province, but within the province, to one of the leading universities in Canada, Dalhousie University, to take a look at this, because I want Nova Scotia data and Nova Scotia information. However, we will have to depend on other jurisdictions for some of the data, Mr. Speaker, because we don't allow for the use of tires for tire-derived fuel now. At this present stage, this motion is I would say, premature, perhaps somewhat out of order, simply because there is no application to change the industrial approval, and the industrial approval process hasn't even kicked in because there is no application, Mr. Speaker. But I can assure speakers, and I can assure members of the public, that this scientific study and the decision that is made if an application comes forward will be based on sound science, on what's good for the environment, and also on considerations of people's health. And that was one of the mandates that I gave to Dal in the study. So I'm very much looking forward, Mr. Speaker, to looking at this study. I hope it's looked at everything I've asked for. If not, then I'll make the commitment to the House that we'll go back and ask for some more data. But even then, that data will sit there because there is no application at this point. And so the data is there more for information than for anything else. So I thank the honourable member for the opportunity to speak about this, and look forward to further interventions by members opposite.
Thank you. The honourable member for Halifax Atlantic.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and for the opportunity to do an intervention here. I'm certainly pleased to know that the Dalhousie review will be made public, and that if it is not sufficient to deal with the health and environmental implications of the burning of rubber tires at the Lafarge plant, that there will be further requests. I should say, however, that although there are advances in technology, what we're dealing with is a very, very old kiln. We're dealing with one of the oldest cement kilns in operation in North America today, 35 years old. This was built in 1972, and it has proven to be inadequate for the purpose for which it was built. So I think it is very important that we remember that we're not talking about great technological advances at this point. However, it also demonstrates the problem is an old problem. The issue of burning rubber and what to do with rubber tires, natural rubber tires and now synthetic rubber tires, has plagued the province for at least 14 years. In 1996, the Resource Recovery Fund Board instituted the levy, the $3 levy on the sale of every tire in the province. And even at that point, there were some 900,000 tires a year to be disposed of. We've gone through an awful lot of tires since then, and there have been problems in the interim. If you look back in Hansard, you look back in the discussions of this House, this is a chronic and ongoing issue. What shall we do with all these tires? They have been stockpiled. We did have Tire Recycling Atlantic Corporation in the Valley, which has now moved to New Brunswick, and I understand feels that they would be willing to receive more tires, in fact, from Nova Scotia to go through their crumbing process, if Nova Scotia were willing to forego those tires and send them to New Brunswick.
But that company, in fact, although it was in operation there, was moved. They had difficulties with stockpiles and stockpiling. There were also a number of more informal dumps which were the subject of ministerial orders for cleanup because these were fire hazards in the numbers of tens of thousands of tires stockpiled in various patches of woods around the province, particularly in the South End and in the Colchester and Cumberland areas, not that far from the existing Brookfield plant. I don't actually know what has been the final disposal of those stockpiles. We know that they were cleaned, that they were piled neatly, but not necessarily that they've been removed. And I would actually put to the Minister the question of what is happening to piles of, or are there in fact piles of these older tires as well. Stockpiling is, of course, a problem with many kinds of garbage, and as I mentioned earlier today in the House, there have been previous proposals for burning garbage for so-called energy recovery or waste to energy. And really it has to be remembered that's absolutely the lowest on the hierarchy of energy, of waste, recycle, or waste, reduce, reuse, recycle, recover energy. The absolute lowest. And it is done in other jurisdictions. Absolutely, it is done in other jurisdictions. But it is stringently opposed by the residents of those jurisdictions, by the science backing the residents of those jurisdictions, and wherever there are new proposals, they are really running into difficulties. I'd refer you particularly to Montana and to Vermont, both of which have expressed a great deal of concern for the croplands in their area, and I can't see why we in Nova Scotia should feel that our croplands are any more invulnerable to the deposition of heavy metals which can be emitted, which are emitted in fact as particulates from the burning of tires in kilns. The Vermont case is interesting, and I've mentioned it here before, because the state of Vermont has actually sued the state of New York for what was only a 2-week trial approval of burning of tires in a pulp and paper plant. And that is what makes it open, what reminds us that in fact, wherever burning of tires has been approved, once it has been approved, there is always the possibility that it will be approved in other industries. And although the Minister may say that it's premature to be talking about this, I would suggest it is not, because even if Lafarge, which has certainly invested a great deal of money and energy into this process already, does not receive an industrial approval, we will still have tires which need to be disposed of. And as the Minister rightly says, these tires represent a liability to the province. So how do we dispose of them? Well, how do other jurisdictions dispose of them? Crumbing, rubberized asphalt, a variety of rubber products which are produced. I am not aware of this, but I have wondered, in fact, why do we not do true tire recycling? Why do we not produce new tires from old ones, molten tires? We, in fact, have a rubber tire manufacturer here in this province, in the Goodyear plant, and I would be interested to know whether they would have use for crumb stock in recycling, because tires receive a lot of their strength, in fact, from the steel belts inside them, as well as anything else. And I don't know whether, in fact, studies have been done on what can be done with crumb rubber for producing new tires, which would genuinely reduce the amount of raw rubber going into the environment and being used. One of the arguments which was made, and I'd like to address this as well, by the Resource Recovery Fund Board, was that this reduces greenhouse gases. Well, how does this reduce greenhouse gases? It's because the tires are not being trucked away to be crumbed in another province. That suggests to me that somebody thinks the environment is only about greenhouse gases. Somebody thinks that the only health which matters is that the current flavor of the month, which is complying with the reduction, the very important reduction of greenhouse gases, but it is most definitely not the only element to be considered in looking at human health and safety. And there's nothing which says that these tires have to be trucked out of the province. They have, in fact, been crumbed in the province, and they can be used elsewhere in the province. I don't know whether, in fact, TRACC, as I say, has left the province, and it would appear that the Kemptown the Kemptown facility, which was Crumming Tires, obviously felt that it was no longer economically viable for them to be receiving tires for true recycling, and they stopped receiving those tires many, many months ago. People, gas station operators found themselves piled up with them. So trucking away is not the only thing to be considered, because where do the tires get used, how do they get used, and what ends up in our air and potentially in our soil, our groundwater, our food supply. One of the things that's most concerning to me, in fact, is that Nova Scotia has received the very dubious distinction of being, parts of Nova Scotia, dubious distinction of being one of the mercury hotspots of eastern North America. That puts us on the map. That puts us on the worldwide map. And one of the known emissions, particulate emissions from the burning of tires, is in fact mercury. Why are we actually proposing to increase our mercury emissions by doing this? It seems to me absolutely foolish. And one of the things we know about mercury is that it bioaccumulates. So not only is it the mercury which ends up in the air, but the mercury which ends up in lungs, fatty tissues, milk, dairy products potentially. This is a very, very real threat, and that is only one of the heavy metals which is put into the air when you burn tires. I understand that the Lafarge plant has not yet made an industrial approval, an application for industrial approval to burn tires, and that it is still burning coal. I do understand that, but I do not understand why it is putting so much time and energy into this if it does not intend to apply. And so before the Lafarge farce comes to a head, I would like to see this province make real and substantive commitments that the burning of tires is not acceptable recycling practice, and that not only will it not take place at the Lafarge plant, it will not be permitted to take place in order to supply cheap fuel for any fuel-needing enterprise in the province of Nova Scotia. It's absolutely not worth it to the people who live in Nova Scotia. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The honourable member for Digby-Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to be able to stand here today and speak about this of burning tires. I was just thinking while I was sitting there, we used to, when we was children, we used to go on the pond at night in the middle of the community, and we'd get an old tire and lighted a fire on the middle of the ice at night. And the next day, the people in the community would give us hell all day because of the soot balls that would come off of this bonfire at night and drop in their yard, on their cars, on their doorsteps. And this was from burning one tire on the pond at night. So we always made sure the people next door to the pond wasn't home when we done it again. So that was one tire, one little bonfire. So I can imagine if we burned that 1 million a year in the province, what the calls you would get about soot balls flying around. I want to say something here on what the Minister of Environment said about us over here on this side. Speaking too early. Speaking before this even came to our environment. Well, I would like to tell the Minister we're just trying to be proactive here. If we see something like this coming at us, I think we should talk about it before it hits you, not after it hits you. I mean, that's just good common sense to me. He also spoke about other places burning these tires around this country and other countries. That doesn't make it right. Just because other countries are doing it, I think we as Canada should know better than that, or at least as Nova Scotia should know better than that. I also, Mr. Speaker, believe that the Resource and Recovery Fund Board was created to ensure that the people of Nova Scotia receives the maximum environmental benefits associated with responsible solid waste management. And the Department of Environment and Labour is responsible for the air quality standards and must enforce these regulations to keep our environment and air clean. And Mr. Speaker, we also in this resolution, Resolution 1921, our party, we believe and urge the government to enforce its air quality regulations and call upon the RRFB to move forward with better and more environmentally friendly initiatives. Mr. Speaker, I want to, if I may, I want to give a new meaning to the rubber hits the road. We've heard that saying of the rubber's hitting the road tonight. Well, I want to talk tonight about different rubber hitting the road. And I believe the Minister of Transport should be interested in this also. I got a document here and I took a few things out of it. Mr. Speaker, rubberized asphalt has been used for more than 20 years to resurface highways and city streets in Arizona when pavement surfaces reach their normal life expectancy. While it helped reduce the disposal of used tires, it recently has been recognized for its reduction of traffic noise also. Rubberized asphalt consists of regular asphalt paving mixed with crumbed rubber, ground up, and used tires that would otherwise be discarded or taking up space in landfills or being burnt. Approximately 1,500 tires are used for every lane mile of rubberized paving. That is 900,000 tires in this province. We could put that into 600 miles of paving into this province every year. That's quite an amazing number, I would say. And the American Department of Transport, Mr. Speaker, has used rubberized asphalt as a pavement preservation strategy on major highways throughout the states. But it was the city of Phoenix that pioneered the use of the product in the mid-1960s, almost 45 years ago. And we're standing here thinking about burning these tires. For 45 years, they've been paving the roads in the city of Phoenix. The earliest use of rubberized asphalt by the city was in 1964, when it was incorporated into the chip seal program for the city streets. A rubberized asphalt chip seal, which used a mixture of rubberized asphalt and gravel, was applied to a street in 1971 as a temporary measure. However, it performed so well that the street was not reconstructed until 20 years later in 1992. This product was shown to have a number of advantages. It does not reflect cracks from the existing pavement. It is more durable and skid resistant than conventional asphalt. It reduces the traffic noise and provides a smooth, quiet ride, and even possibly given better gas mileage from less friction. Good stuff. Rubber to rubber. Not rubber to road, I guess. Noise test on chip seal and asphalt rubber pavements on 7th Street by the City of Phoenix showed a decrease of 10 decibels, or about 90% reduction in noise level alone. Research shows reduction in noise levels of 50 to 75% is commonly attained by using this material. More than 4.2 million tons of rubberized asphalt has been used on Arizona highways since 1988. Those projects have resulted in recycling about 15 million old tires. That there is a real good news story of what we can do with these tires. But I'll tell you even a better story. And it's right here in this province. It's right here. It's right here in Digby, Annapolis. 7 years ago, Mr. Speaker, the South Range Crossroad in my riding was applied with this crushed rubber. Not crumbed rubber, it was stripped up rubber. 1 kilometer was done to this road. And I invite anybody to come to Digby and look at this piece of road. On each side of this road in the last 7 years, I don't know how many tons of gravel have been dumped on each side of it. Thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars worth. But on that 1 kilometer of road where that 1 foot deep of rubber is, under 2 to 3 inches of gravel, it's perfect. It's just like pavement. We have got it. We have got the example here in Digby Annapolis. Why I wanted the minister to listen to this, we have got about 200 miles of road in Digby Annapolis, dirt road. We will take every tire that this province has in Digby and Annapolis and put them in our roads. That's what we're willing to do. Because we have got proof of 1 kilometer down there that has made a beautiful little piece of road. So, the problem is solved today. We haven't got to burn these tires. We'll take them in Digby Annapolis and put them into the 200 miles of one. Right now it's 1 foot deep, the muck on them, and when the rest of the frost comes out, it's going to be 2 feet. The calls are starting already. So I want to go home, Mr. Speaker, with a solution to this problem of not burning these tires, and we'll take them in Digby and put them in the roads. Because that piece of road, I've talked to the engineer that was involved, I've talked to the manager there. One little bit of a problem, though, I should say, when it gets cold, it seems to freeze a little bit faster than the regular road. But I believe that's just the same as our bridges are. But it's got 1 foot of rubber into that road, which makes perfect drainage. It's always nice and dry, even after a big rain, even in the spring when the frost is coming out. This piece of road is just amazing down there. So I can see why in Phoenix, Arizona, that they're going to pave every road in that city with this rubber into it. And I dare say, like they're saying, I believe it's even better on fuel. So anyway, Mr. Speaker, with that, I just want to say that's why I wanted the Minister of Transport to listen to this, because it's something that we can look into, and I believe the Environment Minister can have the answer for Lafarge. Lafarge is into the paving industry. Get them to work with this rubber and put it into our roads and not put it into our air and pollute it more. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The time allotted for debate on Resolution 1921 has now expired. The Honourable, the House Leader of the Liberal Party.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, would you please call Bill 143?
Bill number 143. The Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'm delighted to be able to stand today and have a chance to discuss Bill 143, which is a bill to change the Income Tax Act and offer a tax credit to consumers who choose to purchase fuel-efficient vehicles. And there are 2 levels of taxation, tax credits that are provided for in this bill. One for vehicles that are fuel efficient, and another for hybrid vehicles that meet an even higher rating for city driving and the consumption of fossil fuels. And Mr. Speaker, I believe that the time has certainly come for the government to look seriously at this. In our latest federal budget, which was just brought down on Monday, the federal Tories have finally somewhat seen the light and have actually introduced a similar measure to encourage consumers to make the right choice when they're going to buy a new or used vehicle. And in the bill that I've introduced, it should be mentioned this is the 3rd time that I've brought it to the House and introduced it so that it is on our order paper. Up to this point, the government has not embraced it, which I think is unfortunate. In doing so, we had a chance to be one of the first provinces to take measures that would actually recognize the importance of reducing greenhouse gases and the importance of improving our emissions so that we will be contributing less to climate change. The time is now, the urgency is increasing, and I believe the public understands that too, Mr. Speaker. Without a doubt, the public is asking us, I know individually in our own roles as MLAs and in our critic areas, to get with it, to start making some noise and to ensure that measures are taken to start improving our record here in Nova Scotia. And Mr. Speaker, I think it's something that most Nova Scotians would be surprised to hear, that actually in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, Nova Scotians on a per capita basis are the highest emitters of greenhouse gases. So as a small province with less than 1 million people, we are actually per person creating more greenhouse gases than any other Canadians. And I think given the urgency and given what we know about climate change now, which is really irrefutable science that says this is a major concern for us, Nova Scotians should want to be in the forefront, in fact, leaders in making this change, Mr. Speaker. And having introduced this bill, I make the point that this is one part of what should be a multi-pronged approach to trying to improve our environment. It starts with individuals and how we consume and how we manage our own lives to try and decrease our footprint in terms of our environmental damage that we each and every one of us cause. In terms of this, Mr. Speaker, the actual percentage of Canada's total greenhouse gas emissions from the use of cars is 12%. So you can see, Mr. Speaker, that if we make the choice to go to a more fuel-efficient vehicle, we can make a dramatic improvement in terms of the amount of greenhouse gases that we are producing. And Mr. Speaker, in the summer of 2005, I had the opportunity to attend the Eastern Conference of the governors, the group of American governors that meet. And one of the workshops that was held at that convention in Connecticut was on climate change. And we had world-class scientists come talk to us about the evidence that was out there to support changes in policy. And they were asking us as legislators in our respective states and provinces to understand the problem so that we could take some constructive action. And believe me, to deal with this problem, Mr. Speaker, we need to have real commitment from the top, from our leaders, and that starts with the individuals that sit right here in the legislature. But best of all, and most of all, we need the support of our government to move forward. And I stress that this is just one measure in a whole host of measures that are needed. But I believe that the cost of a hybrid vehicle in particular is really out of reach for many people buying a vehicle. And for that reason, Mr. Speaker, we need to offer some incentive, a little additional reason for people to think twice when they're making that very significant purchase. And I know I went through that very decision this summer, Mr. Speaker, and I did buy a fuel-efficient vehicle, but I did not buy a hybrid vehicle. And the difference in price was about $6,000 to make that change. So I know that families go through a complicated process of discussion and deliberation about making that decision, and I believe a tax credit will make a difference to people in purchasing. Right now, only about 3% of the vehicles sold are hybrids, and I believe, Mr. Speaker, that we need to see that come up significantly. And another point of this bill that I think is important is it does offer an incentive if you're buying a smaller vehicle that also has a lower usage of fuel, and that would be things like your Toyota Echo, and there's a list of cars that would fit into that. Civics as well fit in, but there's a list. And I know that it's time for us to challenge the car makers and the purchasers to change. And I believe consumer demand will make that difference right up the chain, right back to the technologies that our car manufacturers are using. So we have to start somewhere, and this is a very good measure that would begin to encourage people to make the right decision in their car purchases. At the same time, I believe that there's another aspect of this which could be looked at, and that is to put penalties on people who choose to buy the large vehicles that create a lot of greenhouse gases that are not fuel efficient. And we have not gone to that point in the bill that I'm introducing. I strongly believe that people can be encouraged and motivated by an incentive. I note that the federal government has now introduced a penalty for certain vehicles that are definitely in the high usage for fuel and will contribute in a very negative way to greenhouse gases. But, Mr. Speaker, the time is now, and I cannot strongly enough urge the government to please look at this bill. Consider it as one small step in what needs to be a very big process towards improving Nova Scotia's record as the worst greenhouse gas emitters in the country. While I have the floor, Mr. Speaker, it would be useful as well to encourage the government to look at Nova Scotia Power and regulations that are in place now, and I think many more are needed to control the pollution coming from Nova Scotia Power plants. Mr. Speaker, the impact there is 50% of the greenhouse gases that I'm referring to here in Nova Scotia are coming from the coal burning and other plants of Nova Scotia Power. So we need to definitely look at that as well as we improve our climate record in Nova Scotia, our fuel emissions, I should say, and greenhouse gas emissions. And I believe that that is one component that needs to be considered very much because, as I say, 12% of greenhouse gases come from our operation of vehicles. There are other contributing factors as well. But I would like to see Nova Scotians be at the forefront of change because of our record of having the highest greenhouse gas emissions. I believe we should be at the forefront of adopting change and being ahead of the pack and not always behind. We are too quick to follow in this province, and it's time we took the lead and were able to say and hold our head high and say in national meetings of ministers that we have done certain measures that are ahead of the curve and are actually leading other provinces. And I know that the minister knows what those measures are. I'm sure he's looked at them, and I would encourage him to have a look at actually introducing them. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The Honourable the Minister of Energy.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member across the way for her dialogue this evening. Mr. Speaker, we're here today to discuss Bill 143, but the member took the liberty to talk about GHGs, greenhouse gas emissions, so I think maybe her point, Mr. Speaker, was to introduce this bill to help reduce gas emissions and permit Nova Scotia to play its part in the world's decision of helping our environment. Mr. Speaker, just this morning, the environment reported that this has been one of the warmest winters in history, one of the warmest winters recorded in history. And Mr. Speaker, we know why, because of climate change. Now, with the weather that we've been experiencing lately, we may not believe that things are actually warming up, but there's a difference between our weather and our climate, Mr. Speaker. The province of Nova Scotia has put a number of initiatives into play in which I'm very proud of, Mr. Speaker. And I would like to take an opportunity to touch lightly upon some of the initiatives that we put in place to reduce gas emissions before I talk about the bill that's before us this evening. The province of Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker, has created an agency called Conserve Nova Scotia. Our government has put in $10 million into a fund to promote our people, the people of Nova Scotia, to become more aware about energy efficiency. Mr. Speaker, that's a lot of money to put into a program to promote energy efficiency. We have put programs together to help people to become more energy efficient. Mr. Speaker, I could stand here in my place today and I could list maybe 5, 10 or more programs that in the end of the day add up to less greenhouse gas emissions. But also, Mr. Speaker, the Department of Energy is responsible for the climate change. And Mr. Speaker, I am proud to say here today that we made it mandatory for the Nova Scotia Power to put over 20% of renewables in their mix by 2013. The member across the way, she said that the province should be taking a leadership role. Mr. Speaker, we are taking a leadership role. I can tell you that's some of the strongest restrictions in Canada for the province of Nova Scotia to go to a utility, and I said make mandatory. Now we could say, Mr. Speaker, what does mandatory mean? Oh, another minister suggesting that a utility should follow suit? Well, Mr. Speaker, this minister has put a penalty in place. And by 2013, if Nova Scotia Power does not adhere to the rules and regulations of the province, they pay a penalty of $500,000 a day. That proves to Nova Scotians that this government means business when it comes to climate change. Mr. Speaker, through the Conserve Nova Scotia, we're getting to the point, through Conserve Nova Scotia, we are putting programs in place to help Nova Scotians reduce gas emissions. Mr. Speaker, we have wood stove rebates. We have, oil furnace rebates. Mr. Speaker, we have insulation, not rebates, but programs, on and on and on. But, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to the bill that I'm standing up discussing, the bill is quite interesting. What does this bill mean? Well, the member states that if someone purchases an energy efficient automobile, that they should get a tax rebate or a tax cut. Mr. Speaker, you know, I think that we should go a little further with that. Mr. Speaker, the Nova Scotia government agrees with the reduction of gas emissions or greenhouse gases. But, Mr. Speaker, we believe that through education and changing the behavior habits of people, and especially the motorists on the highway, will be more beneficial than simply a tax reduction. Mr. Speaker, we know that most people in Nova Scotia plan to purchase an automobile. Have they recently purchased one and will not purchase one in the next 5 years? And, Mr. Speaker, this incentive will not help reduce gas emissions. But, Mr. Speaker, through education, through proper education and behavioral habits, we can help reduce gas emissions. Number one, Mr. Speaker, public transit. This government has and will be providing money to our municipalities to help with the transit ideas. Mr. Speaker, I want to tell you that we put a program in place to encourage motorists to keep their tires inflated properly, to make sure that their engine is tuned up properly. Mr. Speaker, we've asked Nova Scotians not to allow their vehicles to idle on those very cold mornings longer than is necessary, Mr. Speaker. So what I'll tell you, Mr. Speaker, we also, if you want to go down another path, we also are encouraging Nova Scotians to use CFLs, Mr. Speaker. Do you know if each home was to replace one traditional light bulb with a CFL in Canada, that it would be the same thing if we took 66,000 automobiles off the road in Canada? So imagine, Mr. Speaker, if each homeowner was to replace two light bulbs, the benefits of that to greenhouse gas emissions. Mr. Speaker, it's not about forcing people to do things. It's about fairness, Mr. Speaker, and through education and through Conserve Nova Scotia and through the will of this government, people will willingly, Mr. Speaker, adapt to the new way to reduce gas emissions. Because I'll tell you, member, I thank you for bringing this up today because it gives me an opportunity to speak. Nova Scotians are very responsible. Nova Scotians care about climate change. They understand the climate change file. Well, Mr. Speaker, just not too long ago, I had an opportunity, on a number of occasions, to view Inconvenient Truth. And through the department, we made sure that all children, or children, I shouldn't say all children, but children in our educational system at a very young age have a clear opportunity to understand the climate file. What a wonderful thing, Mr. Speaker. We put CDs, we put staff members right into the classroom. And if you're talking about changing behavioral habits, I'll tell you, you want to start with our young people, Mr. Speaker, because this government believes in the youth of Nova Scotia. And they will change the way we go. Mr. Speaker, I don't know how much time I have, but I'm feeling good tonight, and I feel like going on forever, because I'm talking about the right thing, Mr. Speaker. I'm talking about our government doing the right thing for our environment and for the climate of this world, Mr. Speaker. Now, Mr. Speaker, as I said earlier on, I have a book here, Mr. Speaker, but it's not necessary for me to look at it tonight. But I want to tell you, Mr. Speaker, that as we move along and as this government invests money to educate people to be more sensitive and to be concerned about our environment, I applaud the progressive conservative government of Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker. I do so. How much time do I have left? That was it. Thank you.
Thank you. The honourable member for Halifax Fairview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill is of particular interest to me since I believe I'm right in saying that I am the only member in this House who owns a vehicle that would actually qualify for this credit. I've been driving a Toyota Prius for the last 2 years. The Toyota Prius has the best, bar none, Mr. Speaker, the best gas mileage of any vehicle on the road in Canada today. Now, I did say that I was the only one who owned one because I'm aware that the Minister of Energy drives one. But as a matter of fact, his vehicle was bought for him by his department. So one could argue that he received a rather large rebate, Mr. Speaker, and when because he didn't have to pay for any of it. Now, when I talk to people about my Toyota Prius, the two most common questions are, how much did it cost, and do you have to plug it in? Those are the questions that I get the most. And I think it's very important to dispel any myths there are out there about these vehicles. So let me start, first of all, by talking about the technology behind it. These are beautiful cars. They drive wonderfully, and they are an absolute marvel of engineering, because the way it works is there is both a gas engine and an electric motor. And the car itself makes a decision about which combination of those two motive forces is most efficient in the circumstances. So there's some times when it's driving entirely on electric, and there's other times when it's entirely on gas, and sometimes it's on a combination of the two, whatever is best for the circumstance. For example, if the car is going downhill, it will generally be moving entirely on electric, and therefore zero emissions. Conversely, if one is accelerating or going uphill, the electric motor is not powerful enough to move the car, so then it moves almost entirely on gasoline. But back and forth, the driver doesn't have to make any decisions. But unlike older electric car technology, this is not something that has to be plugged in. And in fact, the genius of it, the absolute engineering marvel of it, is that the battery charges itself when you brake or decelerate. The very action of braking or decelerating is what charges and continues to charge the electric battery. And that's all it takes. And that's all it takes. It is, as I say, Mr. Speaker, a real marvel of engineering. And it does deliver on superb gas mileage. It does live up to the billing. I find that I'm able to get, in the summertime, about 5 liters per 100 kilometers. And in the wintertime, when the heater and the defroster and all that stuff is going, then it runs at about 7 liters per 100 kilometers. And for those who think in the somewhat more old-fashioned way of miles per gallon, that works out to between 45 and 55 miles per gallon, day in, day out, month in, month out. And compared to the other car that we had in my family, which is a 1997 Toyota Camry, it's just about twice as good on gas as the Toyota Camry, which is really quite remarkable. One of the other remarkable things about it is when you're driving it, it has a real-time gas usage meter, so you can actually see how much gas you're using. And so you learn, the car in essence trains you about what activities it is you do that cause you to use more gas than others. And so you start to learn about how to accelerate the car to use the least amount of gas, because you've got a screen that tells you exactly how much gas you're using at any given time. It's really quite marvelous. So should there be a tax credit for it? Well, we know that in Monday's federal budget, a tax credit was offered. In fact, my vehicle, or to be more precise, people buying a vehicle like mine, would qualify for a $2,000 tax credit, and the bill that's before the House right now proposes the same thing. If the two governments got together on this, that means anybody proposing to buy a Prius would get a $4,000 tax credit. So then you say, well, is it worth it? Let's talk first of all about the price. I know how much the minister's department paid for his vehicle. It was $34,499, because, of course, the department doesn't have to pay tax, so that's the pre-tax price. My price, with tax included, was $36,575. Now, I don't mind at all telling people that, because I want them to know the reality of the situation. I heard people in the news yesterday saying, oh, these are $70,000 or $80,000 cars. That's nonsense. They're not. I paid, all taxes in, $36,575. And so this tax credit would take $4,000 off that. Now, whether that's enough to make people buy the vehicle who wouldn't have otherwise is the real question. Economists have a term for this called elasticity of demand, and what it means is, how does demand vary with the price? And of course, it's not just as simple as most people would usually believe, whereas if the price goes down, there's a corresponding increase in purchases. Most things don't work that way. So what is not clear is if we lower the price of cars like a Prius by $4,000, what impact will that exactly have? Is that just a gift to people who would have bought these vehicles anyway, or will it really cause people to buy a vehicle who wouldn't otherwise have bought it? The real problem with these vehicles, Mr. Speaker, the real problem is there's not enough supply. When I went looking for my vehicle, I was told that unless they could find a vehicle on a lot in the Maritimes, I was looking at a 6 to 8 month wait. There are not enough vehicles on the road, and so it doesn't matter how much of a credit you offer people. If they can't get the car now, they're probably going to look somewhere else. And another problem is none of these vehicles, at least the Toyota Prius, is actually manufactured in Canada. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could offer a tax credit for cars manufactured in Canada, creating jobs in Canada? But that's not the situation we're currently in. Mr. Speaker, we have to remember also when we're talking about price that you have to factor in the fact that it uses, as I said, half as much gas as comparable vehicles that are 100% internal combustion. And so you have to figure out over the lifetime of the vehicle, you're going to be saving quite a lot of money in gasoline. But it takes a fairly sophisticated consumer to be able to estimate how long they have the vehicle, estimate how much gas they'll save, figure in the tax credit, and then compare it to a truly comparable car. So it's not at all clear that tax credits by themselves are enough to cause people to buy the vehicle. Although I do have to say, and the minister will know this, is that when you're actually driving one of these vehicles, the feeling of environmental virtue that you have is absolutely priceless. So, Mr. Speaker, perhaps we are trafficking here in symbols because it's not at all clear this bill would actually cause more people to go out and buy actual cars that would actually be on the road reducing our gas emissions. It wouldn't be the first time that this House would be trafficking in symbols, and so I can say that our caucus supports the bill and encourages the government to support it as well. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member. The Honourable Member for Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and certainly pleased to rise today and speak for a few minutes in support of this bill. This is the kind of legislation that we do need to see here now in the provincial legislature on a regular basis, and certainly not to tip my hat too strongly here, but certainly we will have a number of pieces of legislation around environmental issues, concerns that need to be addressed in Nova Scotia. I think this is one, again, small measure that will change the thinking around fuel efficiency, which of course leads to a reduction of not just greenhouse gases, but also I think better environmental health, especially in our concentrated areas. So especially here in the downtown of Halifax, anything that can reduce the carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide from emissions, I think is certainly a step in the right direction. And one of the things that we often see around legislation, and the minister alluded to this, and in fact spoke about the need for education and the education component that is so valuable, especially for young Nova Scotians to be exposed to. But very often it is actually legislation which becomes the complement piece to affect real change. Anytime government comes up with a policy change, a policy shift, a new piece of legislation, certainly I feel that it is that legislative action which will often bring about the major change and the complement certainly to education. So I think that's why this bill should be supported by all members of the House. It does go beyond symbolism. and it moves to taking concrete, real action and changing consumer habits. You know, it is our adult population that is out buying vehicles, and if a tax credit can be one little measure here, then I think that certainly should be embraced by all members and all parties of the House. There's no question that the whole issue around greenhouse gases, climate change, is what is driving us to take this action and introduce this piece of legislation. But we're seeing many other things happening as well. You know, cars, transit are an essential component of daily life, and so we will see some other things happen as well. Kentville, in the Annapolis Valley, is taking the initiative towards reducing idling in their town, which again is going to be an energy saver, and it is going to be again less pollution in the concentrated downtown area, and of course less greenhouse gases, less impact on the environment. And we're seeing a great endorsement of that by the residents of the town. So a bylaw will in fact start the process of people making a change here. And I think the same can be said that if we bring in a tax credit towards hybrid cars and consumer demand goes up, and it is really consumer demand that will change the course of the day, and we will see you know, a much greater percentage than 2 or 3% of our current car stock that will be in fact much more energy efficient and reducing greenhouse gases. One of the areas that when I was the environment critic, brought in a bill that would in fact encourage greater amounts of transit use, and we had that bill updated by the member for Clayton Park yesterday, and it will now give 100% tax credit to families who buy transit passes. And I think that's another area that we really have to encourage people to engage in. And while the minister talks about the need again for transit as a way to reduce greenhouse gases, it's very interesting that on the Eastern Shore, that if the transit system on the Eastern Shore had received about $40,000 or $50,000, it would have kept the system going. And in fact, very often, you know, there are strategic times when a little hand up will be a good measure to, I think, to impact the future. And in this case here, I think it would have been the tipping point towards getting greater consciousness of the transit system and getting much greater ridership for that system. So I think there are many measures around this area that we do need to engage in. Also, this would be a wonderful time for government, in fact, to have their fleet of cars move to, if not hybrid, at least the most fuel-efficient fleet that they could possibly put on the road. And that's the kind of leadership that Nova Scotians want to see from all of our legislators, and I know I certainly personally am being challenged to have a more fuel-efficient vehicle. Before I do close, yes, we are starting to see some things happening around Conserve Nova Scotia, but also I do want to acknowledge the work of the Ecology Action Centre, because for 35 years, and especially going back to the energy crisis of 1973, the Ecology Action Centre started to make us aware of ways in which we could be much more fuel efficient and also have a healthier environment. So I certainly wanted to acknowledge their work, and their leadership role in Nova Scotia on this very, very important issue of all Nova Scotians engaging in a lighter footprint in terms of greenhouse gases. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. He shut me down.
Thank you. The time allotted for opposition business has expired. The Honourable, the Deputy Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move the House be adjourned to sit again tomorrow, commencing at 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. Following the daily routine will be public bills for second reading.
Thank you. The motion before the House is for the House to rise and meet again tomorrow at the hour of 2 p.m. Is the House ready for the question? Question has been called. All those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Aye. All those against? Motion carried. The House will sit tomorrow between the hours of 2 p.m. and 6 p.m. We have arrived at the moment of interruption. The adjournment debate has been chosen as announced earlier. The resolution that's before the House, be it resolved that all MLAs in this House of Assembly acknowledge government has honoured the Premier's green commitment to require significant additional Crown lands. The Honourable, the Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, what a joy it is to be able to rise and speak to this motion this afternoon. It has been quite an extraordinary year for Crown land acquisitions in Nova Scotia, and very pleased to stand today and speak about some of these recent land acquisitions. But, Mr. Speaker, I think we have to recognize that $35 million worth of land acquisitions